everyone, I'm Ed Roman. I'll be moderating today's Tea Talk session. A little bit about me, I'm a serial entrepreneur and investor based here in San Francisco. And I've started 3 companies, had a couple of exits. And basically today we're going to be learning as much as we can about the founder of Dotloop. So Allison here has given us his precious time to be with us today. Has had a successful exit recently with Dotloop, and so we'd like to learn more about him and his business. So maybe Austin, you could start off by just telling us a little bit about yourself and your background, where you grew up, and kind of where you went to college, that kind of stuff.
Sure, happy to. Thanks for having me. I'm Austin, and I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. My dad was is a carpenter, so I grew up around real estate and construction. And when I was 17 years old, I just had saved up a few $1,000, which was enough for a down payment on a house in Cincinnati. And I bought this fixer-upper house and got the bug for real estate. Shortly thereafter, I became a licensed real estate agent. And I sold real estate for, I guess it was about 5 years through undergrad and then eventually law school. And during that 5-year period, I became frustrated by the inefficiencies in the real estate transaction. And that frustration ultimately led to the creation of my company, Dotloop, which is now part of Zillow Group.
That's great. And so you really solved the problem that you had yourself and you experienced in your own life when you started this company, correct?
That's right. My belief and experience and interaction with other entrepreneurs is that the best businesses start with big problems, specifically problems that you're passionate about, because one of the things that I've found about entrepreneurship is it's really hard work. You know, somebody said it just earlier this evening that it turns out that building a company is much easier said than done, and I think that one key ingredient to helping to increase your chances is working on something that you're really passionate about, because in those moments where the lows are really low and there may not be any light at the end of the tunnel, or there may not feel like there's any light at the end of the tunnel, the one thing that gets you through it is pursuing something that you believe in.
That's great. So let's start with the name Dotloop. So where did that name come from? What's the etymology of that name?
So we needed a name for our company. We actually started with another company name, which was called MLS Contracts, which was descriptive of the type of problem that we thought we were trying to solve at the time. Quickly learned that it wasn't going to be a great name for a whole host of reasons that I won't bore you with. So we got in a room and started writing down words on the board that really resonated with what we wanted to become and what problem we were trying to solve. And there were 2 phrases that kept coming up on the board. One was connect the dots, and the other phrase was bring people into the loop, because the problem that we were solving for residential real estate was connecting all the various people and activities and tasks that needed to occur throughout a real estate transaction and bring everybody in the loop. So we took the dot in the loop, got the .com, and it became our name.
That's great. And what was the big pain that you noticed, like the really, really vertical specific narrow pain that made you force yourself to want to build this business?
Well, anybody who's ever purchased a home, since we're in, and if I ask that question in Cincinnati, I get a lot more hands that are raised because houses are much more affordable in Cincinnati than they are here in San Francisco. So I'll assume that some people in the room and in the audience haven't purchased a home. When you purchase a home, the process is a hassle, to say the least. There are lots of people involved in the transaction, from real estate agents on both sides of the deal, of course the buyers and the sellers, mortgage, title, insurance, inspection, appraisal, and I can go on and on and on about all these people that are involved in the real estate transaction. Well, in order for a deal to be sold or a home to be sold, all of those people need to work together in coordination with one another to complete a whole bunch of tasks and activities. It turns out that when you try to coordinate around lots of different people who oftentimes are in different locations or even sometimes in different time zones, it's pretty inefficient. So that was the pain point that I felt firsthand. I was 18, 19 years old, driving around Cincinnati, meeting buyers and sellers that I was representing at 10 o'clock at night after they got home from soccer practice to get documents signed, and it was just a complete hassle over and over and over again. And I think what a lot of people do in the world is they just accept things for what they are, and in my case, all the real estate agents around me were just content with the fact that real estate transactions were a hassle. And I decided that I was going to try to change that and make them more seamless, and that's what led to the creation of the company.
That's great. And when you first started this, if you go back several years back and think about how you felt back then, did you ever doubt that this should be a company that you should create? Or did you ever, when you're initially starting this off, double think yourself about, should I create a company here? And how did you build that conviction?
Yes, I had lots of doubts for many, many years because entrepreneurship is like a roller coaster. From the outside, when you read the stories of Facebook or Google or Uber, or well, the Uber stories aren't all so positive lately, but in general, when you read the stories about these companies, it appears to be oftentimes an overnight success, and you hear about all the positives, but 90% of what happens, maybe more, maybe 98% of what happens is a bunch of negative stuff. Problems that don't have solutions, questions that don't have answers, you run out of money, you get sued, you have trouble hiring the people that you want or need to hire, customers don't buy the product as quickly as you think, or aren't as willing to pay as much as you think they will for it. There's just an endless list of problems that create doubt. But to answer the second part to that question, which is, how did I get through it and how did I establish conviction? It goes back to what I said at the beginning around passion. When you believe in something, you sort of forget about everything else. You forget about the rules, you forget about the naysayers and the haters and the doubters, and you're just simply pursuing a solution to a problem that you know exists because you face it firsthand. And I think over time, your mind gets trained into having conviction. I don't know that it just happens, overnight. I think it happens over time, and the passion just develops and incubates.
That's great. And so when you first started this out, did you have a team initially, or was it just you?
I did, yeah. So I first had the idea from selling real estate, and then one of the biggest lessons that I'll share with the group is that no one succeeds alone. The biggest successes are successes that are surrounded by great people and companies that are comprised of great teams. So I needed a technical co-founder, and I called around and ended up meeting this gentleman named Matt, who had a good job at the time and was on his own path. He was maybe 8 or 10 years further along in his career than I was, and I convinced him to basically quit his job and come join me on the startup. So Matt joined me as my technical co-founder, and he and I started building the company together, and then we raised a little bit of money and hired a few people, and then it just scaled up from there.
That's very, very inspiring. So, and I've been in your shoes too. I've tried to start businesses before. Sometimes I've been successful at finding technical co-founders. Sometimes it's been more of a struggle. In your situation, tell me a little bit more about how you felt comfortable about him. So did you have anyone interview him to make sure he was a good technical co-founder? Did you just kind of take a chance on him?
No, I didn't just take a chance. My mom actually works for a large technology company, so amongst the people that I asked for referrals, one was my mother, and she said that she had, and I had known Matt. We had met previously because my mom actually hired Matt as an intern when he was like 18 years old, and she used to always talk about Matt, how he was entrepreneurial and hardworking, and he was constantly pursuing other initiatives on the side. So I had, I think, developed some confidence that Matt was capable before I ever met him. And by the time I sat down with him to talk about this, my main focus was convincing him to come follow me on this journey that at that time did not, appear to have a lot of light at the end of the tunnel.
Exactly, and a lot of these engineers, they're very sought after, and a lot of them are kind of a little bit jaded about the idea of getting stock options and not having a salary initially. Did you have that challenge where your initial team wanted to get paid before you raised money?
No, not with Matt. I mean, he and I were both very aligned going into it, what it was going to take, and we were both willing to basically make the sacrifice. And I had I was married to my wife at the time, and she had a job, which gave me a little bit of stability to be able to put everything on the line. And Matt had done well in his career, so he had the ability to put some time on the line as well. But it is hard. The money part is very, very hard, especially when you're doing it for the first time. Things always take much longer than you expect. They cost more than you expect. As I mentioned, getting customers for most businesses and growing revenue is much harder than you would think. And all of that, creates challenges for first-time entrepreneurs that don't have a track record and aren't able to raise, large sums of money at good valuations right out of the gate.
That's great. So then tell us about the story about how you got that first investor to say yes. What led up to that, and what was the secret sauce to get them over the fence?
So before we even raised our first dollar, Matt and I had depleted all of the money that we had saved up to that point, and that got us through a pretty short period of time, call it less than a year, and we eventually hit a roadblock that told us that we needed to raise capital. So at the time I was working for a large real estate firm, and I went to my boss at that firm and I said, hey, I've been working on this idea during nights and weekends, and in order for the idea to turn into something, we need to raise capital. I don't know how to raise capital, but I need some time to go do it. And I essentially was requesting an unpaid leave from my employer. And he says, his name was Jerry. Jerry says, come over here and show me your software. And I was sitting on the other side of his desk, so I walked across the desk. I logged on and showed him the software. And he has me sit back down on the other side, and he said, well, I've got two pieces of advice for you. The first piece of advice is that, I forgot one detail. The other thing I said to Jerry is that I wanted to go find a CEO for the business, because I thought it would be, I didn't think it would be possible for me to quit my job and become CEO and raise money all at the same time. So I asked Jerry for a temporary leave of absence to raise money and find a CEO. So after I got across the desk, he said, I've got two pieces of advice for you. Piece of advice number one is you have to go follow this dream. Dreams don't come by, every day, and our company's always going to be here if you want to come back. You have to go follow your passion, because I can feel it when you're presenting this to me. And then he said the second piece of advice is more of a question, which is, can I be your first investor? So Jerry had never invested in a tech company. He never angel invested at all, but he had some money on the sidelines, and he offered to be our first investor. And I said, under one condition. And again, I had no clue. I hadn't even done as much as read a blog post on how to raise money. I had never even heard of the concept of angel investing. Didn't know a single venture capitalist. And but right away I thought to myself, if Jerry is willing to invest, there may be other guys like Jerry that could also invest. And I said, you can be our first investor provided that you introduce us to your friends. So he introduced us to a few of his friends, and fast forward a month or two, we had raised our first angel round of capital.
So you put a condition on your first check. You put your first investor to work for you.
Yeah, I didn't know what else to do.
That's great. That's great. So it's really inspiring. I think there's a lot of folks here who I think can appreciate that story, because I think there's many of us who are wondering how the fundraising process works. So take us through then, how did you go from there to a venture capital round?
So we ended up raising, I guess it was $500,000 or $600,000 for that initial seed round, and we burned through that money really quickly and ended up raising again through what became a larger group of angels. And in total, our angels invested something like $3 million before we took on an angel round, or a venture round. And but along the way, as we were raising money, we were also more focused on building the business. And we hit a couple of really important milestones before we ever raised venture money, one of which was signing a large customer, which is now the largest real estate company in the world. And we signed this large customer, which really helped to catapult our growth. And we started, growing like a wildfire and actually became profitable and cash flow positive before we ever took venture capital money. Once we got to that point, I started looking around the room and looking at our product and looking at our engagement metrics and realized that this company was going to be more successful if I could figure out how to surround it with more great minds. So I went all over, I got on the plane, went all over the country and started meeting with other entrepreneurs and venture capitalists in, as I mentioned, lots of cities, not just San Francisco. But I ended up meeting an individual here in San Francisco down in the peninsula named Noel Fenton, who's one of the founding partners of Trinity Ventures. And I really liked Noel. Noel really liked what we were doing, and we ended up getting a term sheet from Noel and Trinity to lead our Series A, and then shortly thereafter we opened up an office in San Francisco and built from there.
That's great. And so from there, what year was that you got that round done?
2012.
Okay, great.
We started the company in November of 2009.
Okay, very nice. And then tell me about after the round was over. What was it like to have a venture capitalist on your board and to interact with them?
Oh, it changed the game. I mean, it brought a level of professionalism and experience, relevant experience to the company that we didn't have before. Our angel investors were super accomplished, very successful, business people and entrepreneurs that I respect a ton. But they would tell you that they had never built a tech company like the one we were trying to build at Dotloop. So when we brought Noel into the boardroom, Noel had built lots of tech companies personally and also invested in hundreds of them through their venture capital firm. And that enabled us to see around corners that we would have otherwise not been able to see around because it's pattern recognition. After X number of companies, it becomes pattern recognition. And having Noel on the board really enabled us to just accelerate the pace of the company's growth.
That's great. So as you started to grow, I'm sure at some point you started to consider, kind of what's your end game plan for this company, and then an opportunity came along. So maybe you tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I meet a lot of entrepreneurs that start their companies and want to sell their company. Like it's something that's on their mind right when they start the company, and that was never on my mind. In fact, for the longest time, I viewed selling the company as a failure. My goal was always to build this company on our own, take the company public, and like many others dream about, build a unicorn. And that's the story that my employees believed. That's the story that my investors believed. So much so that by the time that we actually ended up selling to Zillow Group, I had to convince our investors that it was the right thing to do because they were so, bought into our billion-dollar vision that we had. So what changed my mind? As we built the company, I ended up meeting lots of people in the industry. Just like I had networked with entrepreneurs and venture capitalists, I started networking with other players in the real estate space. And one of those other players was Zillow at the time. Now the company's called Zillow Group because we have a family of brands. So I started getting to know the executives of Zillow Group, and Zillow Group and its executives were always a company and a team that I admired a lot. So I got to know them, and we were always in sort of check-in or business development conversations of some sort, and I guess it was 6 or 8 months probably before we ended up being acquired. We're in one of these business development conversations, and the conversations just evolved into something more than that. And the light bulb that went off in my mind in these conversations that ultimately led me to the decision that it was time to sell was that I realized that our mission at Dotloop was very in sync with the mission of Zillow Group, and that together we might actually be able to achieve our mission much faster and in a much bigger way than we would otherwise be able to do alone. So it was like one of these scenarios where you take 1 + 1 and it equals something much greater than 2. and the light bulb went off, and I sort of just changed my mind and realized that we would be a better company by being part of Zillow Group, and obviously we sold, and it's been great.
That's great. And it must have been a tough decision for you because, you know, I'm sure that you felt, you know, I might be losing some control here, partnering up with Zillow because it's not 100% your company anymore. So, you know, walk me through a little bit about kind of how you were able to overcome those concerns and whether you thought about those at all.
I absolutely thought about them. Dotloop still is my firstborn, and I think about the company, you know, like I think about, well, I don't have children yet, but similar to how I think I would think about my children. Certainly like I think about my dog or one of my other close family members. I mean, I love Dotloop. This is how I've spent all of my professional career. So it was very hard, and I spent many, many months thinking about this decision before I made it. By the time I got to the conclusion that I described before, that this really was the right thing for the company, the right thing for our employees, and the right thing for our customers and for the industry, then I reached the decision that it was the right thing for me. But my priorities, frankly, had to come after those other priorities. First, it's about what's in the best interest of the company, which encompasses employees, shareholders, customers, and all that good stuff. And after the deal, I expected, I have, you know, a lot of friends. Once you get networked into the startup community, you end up having a lot of friends that are in similar situations and have sold companies, and you share experiences before you go into a situation like this. And I knew it would be a little challenging, you know, mentally challenging, but I didn't really know what to expect. I would say that the first 6 months after the sale were pretty tough. It's emotionally just a very different job to go from being, you know, the sole entrepreneur with sole responsibility and you know, complete independence in how you go about doing your job, to being part of a large organization that you know, has to have process and systems and reporting structures. So it was an adjustment, but it's been great. I mean, the Zillow Group has exceeded all of my expectations. Frankly, I wouldn't still be at the company if I didn't love what I was doing and the people that I was doing it with, and believe in the opportunity that we have as an organization. So it has definitely exceeded my expectations.
That's a super inspiring story. So we'll do a couple last questions, and we'll toss it over to the audience for questions. So I guess kind of looking back at things now that you've had your exit, how are you thinking about maybe someday? Do you see yourself becoming an entrepreneur again, or has corporate life kind of taken hold of you, and are you now falling in love with corporate life?
I will, you know, nothing's for certain, but I would say there's a 99% chance that I will start another company again. When, I don't know. Right now I'm very focused on the work I'm doing with Zillow Group, and I think I have, you know, several years of that ahead, because as I mentioned, I mean, most of the people in this room and watching have probably heard of Zillow or Trulia or one of our other consumer-facing brands. So we're a pretty sizable company with significant share, but it's still day one at Zillow Group, and it's exciting to be part of a company that is growing at the pace that we're growing and really changing for the better an industry as big as real estate. So I'm learning a lot, I'm having fun, and for as long as I'm learning and having fun and enjoying the people that I'm working with and believe in the vision that we're pursuing, you know, I don't have any itch to start another company, but I will at some point. And the one other thing that we were talking about just before this that I'll share with the group here is that I think, as I mentioned earlier in the session, the best entrepreneurs that I've ever met, or the most successful ones, however you want to define that, are entrepreneurs that were solving a big problem. I meet some entrepreneurs that just start companies because they wanted to start a company, or they wanted to get rich, or they wanted to be their own boss, or one of these other, you know, reasons that don't make any sense to me, and most of them don't work out. So when I get that question about, are you going to start another company and when, for me it's about, like, I'll know when it's time. I'll know that there's a problem that's just sort of gnawing at me that I'm passionate about, and at that time when I feel it, then it'll be time to sort of start the next thing.
That's great. So we've got a lot of folks here who are maybe first-time entrepreneurs, haven't started a business before, haven't raised money before, is there any kind of just general advice that you might give them, lessons learned from your journey, things that you might have encountered along the way that were unexpected? It could be in any area of starting a business that you might think might be useful for these guys to hear.
Yeah, I could go on for hours, but why don't I try to condense it to the most important points. The most important point is to surround yourself and the company with great people. And it's even more important, I think, than finding a big problem, because when you have the right people, they figure stuff out. So it all starts and ends with people, so just remember that as the most important piece of advice. Whether it's your co-founders, your first employees, your advisors, your investors, the board member or venture capitalist that you invite onto your board, all of these people decisions are the most important decisions you'll ever make. And it's really hard, especially being a first-time entrepreneur, to attract the best people. The best people have lots of options, and they're really expensive. And your small startup without a lot of financial backing is probably not at the top of the list. So it's really hard. You got to be passionate. You got to be compelling. You have to be pursuing something that other people believe in and are willing to get behind. So that would be piece of advice number one. Piece of advice number two would probably just be more of a statement of fact that you all should be aware of, that this is really hard work and it's not for everybody. Succeeding as an entrepreneur for the first time, really at any time, I haven't started my next one yet, but I hear from repeat entrepreneurs that it's hard every time. You gotta love it. I mean, what most entrepreneurs go through, the average person would say is torture. It's 24/7s, hard work, solving tough problems, and it kind of never ends. But if you love it and you're pursuing something that you really believe in, that torture, what most people would describe as torture, is actually amazing. It's like an adrenaline rush. So make sure you know what you're getting into, and if you're as you get into it, if you're feeling that pain and you don't feel the motivation and energy in your heart and the passion in your heart, then it may not be for you, or at least you're not pursuing the right thing yet. So that would be the second piece of advice.
Very well said. Thank you. Well, this has been great. I'd love to hand it over to the audience for questions now. Yeah, go ahead.
You were the first employee. Your technical co-founder was the second employee. What were the functions of number 3, 4, and 5? What were the first kinds of people you hired first?
So the first employee that we hired was actually my brother. And he kind of just stumbled into the company because he was willing to work for nothing and give his heart and soul to the company, and we were willing to take that. He was in college at the time and was going to school for entrepreneurship and business, so he had a whole bunch of skills that we needed, and he was willing to do whatever it took to make it happen. So he became our first employee. After that, we hired developers. And the reason why we hired developers is because we needed help building our software. So for the first 5 or 6 employees, it was basically developers, my brother, and then eventually a customer support guy who helped to sell and train and support our customers. And we all kind of did whatever we had to do until we got to the point where we either had enough progress or a new capital round that would enable us to hire the next round of people that we needed, and then each round or each stage we just kept expanding the team to incorporate more of the right people.
Thank you. Great. Other questions? Good.
You talked a little bit about the transformation that you went through as a sort of a first entrepreneur looking at this, trying to solve this big problem, and how you kind of became a leader as you talked to investors and start managing people and running the challenges that you talked about. Can you kind of walk us through the journey of how you became who you are today?
Sure. So becoming a great leader and great CEO doesn't happen by accident. I mean, maybe for some people it does. You're just born with it. But I think for most it requires work and training and reading. And there's lots of stuff that I read. So I guess there's a couple things that I did to evolve. You know, one is I surrounded myself with great people and I asked for help. And I think I consider it as just good luck, but I was in a meeting with this individual, serial entrepreneur, who I met through our local business center, like in the very, very early days before we had taken on any money. And he agreed to take a meeting with me, and I'm sitting there talking to him for like 2 hours or something. And the whole time I'm thinking, why in the world is this guy spending hours of his time with me? He's important, he's busy. What's the catch? Is he going to ask for a big chunk of my company afterwards? So I asked him. I said, hey, his name was Norman, so he went by Norm. I said, hey, Norm, I appreciate you spending all this time with me, but I got to ask, like, what's the catch? What do I give you out of this relationship? And he said, you know what? It's interesting that you should ask that. What I've found is that most people, not all, but most people who have achieved some level of success in life or business are interested in giving back because they find joy in it, you know? And but it turns out you just got to ask, and most people don't ask. So Norm told me that, and I'm like, wow, if what he's saying is actually true, this is gold, because I'm going to ask everybody I meet who has achieved success to help me. And I did it. I played that card over and over and over again, and you know, by the time we were 2 years into the business, I had 20 advisors, you know, 8 of which were really close, active advisors that were super vested in my success that helped me to grow as a leader and grow as an entrepreneur. And over time, those relationships formalized. You know, some of those advisors who did it just out of the goodness of their heart, we ended up giving, I was able to give stock options to later in the company's life, and fortunately it paid off for them. And other advisors became my coach, so I have a CEO coach that I use and I meet with every single month, and I have been meeting with every month, sometimes multiple times a month, for years. So you have to keep working on it. And on top of surrounding yourself by great mentors and advisors, you know, I read a lot, and I watch other great leaders and just pattern recognize. And then it just becomes, it's like learning anything else. It's like learning to, you know, ride a bike. Once you learn to ride a bike, some of the patterns become second nature. And leadership on some level is the same way, but there's no such thing as a perfect leader. I don't think. You can always be growing and always be improving, and the best leaders do. They're obsessed with learning, and so I'm always trying to grow and improve as a leader.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yep.
Yeah, during the earlier stages of your company, like you say that, you know, surround yourself with great people, the same beliefs. Like, what was the process that you did to find people that had the same beliefs as you?
So the main ingredient, I mean, you gotta hustle. That's how you get in front of the right people. You gotta hustle. It's working LinkedIn, you know, posting job ads, networking, asking for referrals from existing employees or advisors. It's just hustle to get in front of people. And that part, as long as you're willing to hustle, is doable. The part that becomes more difficult is convincing great people to actually come work for you when you're a tiny little startup without a track record and without much capital. And the only secret that I have there that people have given me is feedback, is passion. If you were to talk to some of our initial investors or our initial employees, what most of them would tell you, if you asked them why they invested in Dotloop, they would say, because I could feel Austin's passion. I knew he was passionate. And when somebody is truly passionate, you're willing to eat concrete for breakfast, you know? And when you're willing to eat concrete for breakfast, you have what it takes to build a company. But it starts with that passion, and people can sense it. And now that I know that, I look for it in other people, and I can sense it too. It takes some time to really develop the sense, I guess. But really passionate people are contagious, and you know it right when you meet them. So that that's really the secret of attracting great people. And then the other piece is that you always have to be, evolving your team. It's like if you're a new startup, you couldn't hire Sheryl Sandberg, for example. I don't care how smart or good looking you are. Sheryl Sandberg is not going to come work for a new startup with a first-time entrepreneur without a lot of capital. She's just unrecruitable. Well, as the company evolves and you achieve greater milestones and more recognition in the industry, it becomes more attractive and de-risked a little bit for proven people and leaders and executives. So as you're growing your business, you need to always be looking to add more and more great people to your team. And the other side of that is that not everybody grows at the pace of the business, particularly within businesses that grow really fast. Some people are willing to grow and evolve and learn, and other people are just set in their ways or not able to grow at the pace of the business. And you also, as a leader, have to be able to make those decisions too. And when you're first starting out, they feel painful and they feel wrong, but it turns out that it's actually the right thing to do. And it's always best for the employee and for the company. So be passionate, hustle, and always be looking to surround your company with more and more great people.
So I'll actually ask a follow-on on that. So if you have someone that is not scaling with the organization, but really put in some good work in the early days, and you need to basically hire someone above them or to even do their job at the next level, how do you manage that process? I mean, would you try to find a new role for him within the organization? Is it too painful to do that? Do you just let them go? Like, how do you think about that?
So this takes many, at least in my case, it took many years and many mistakes to figure this out. But the solution is to care about the employee and to be transparent. So I recently heard a speaker, I forget what his name was, but he spoke about this concept that he calls radical candor. And radical candor is about just being, radically honest, but doing it compassionately in everything that you do as a leader or a manager. And when you're transparent and you care about employees, by the time you get to the point where you've decided that it's time for an employee to part ways or for the company to part ways from an employee, if it's a surprise, you didn't do your job as a leader. Now, if we get to the point where somebody needs to move on and they're surprised, like I failed as a leader. So you just have to be honest. And this isn't a negative thing. That's the other thing I had to get my mind around. I think if you reach a point where it's time for somebody to move on from a company, it can be perceived as negative. But it's not. We all go through stages, and we all grow and evolve at different paces. What's most important is that everybody, whether you're an employee or the founder of the company, I believe that you should be doing things that make you happy and that you're passionate about. And if an employee is not happy or not doing work that they're passionate about or that they're excelling at, you're doing them a disservice by letting them stay and or not being transparent about where we're really at. So transparency is the key, which is another thing, by the way, that I always admired about Zillow Group. I mean, Zillow Group is transparent beyond what you could ever imagine for a 3,000 person company. Like anything that can possibly be shared that's legal with because there are some limits to what can be shared within a public company, but whatever can be shared is shared. And that transparency is it's awesome. Amazing things happen when there is complete transparency and honesty in an organization.
I agree. Transparency engenders trust.
Absolutely.
Very well said. Other questions?
Having around 3,000 people to manage, obviously you need a system in place. How do you go about keeping people on the system and running the system efficiently?
So we do have a system. Well, we have a number of systems that help to scale the process of managing lots of people, but the fundamentals are actually the same. We have a set of core values that have evolved, but for the most part are the same core values that the company was founded on many years ago, and are one of the other things that was what really made our merger work with Zillow Group was that our core values at Dotloop were closely aligned to the core values that Zillow Group had before we ever joined. So becoming part of this new culture was just a natural step for us. So you got to stick to the basics. You know, one of the basics that we talk a lot about at Zillow Group for managers is this concept of servant leadership. In the old school thought process, leaders tell their employees what to do and how to do it. And what we think is the right way to lead, leaders should be serving their employees. Leaders are there to help their employees succeed, to remove roadblocks, to provide feedback. So servant leadership is really the key to it, and adhering to the company's core values. If all of the leaders are fantastic at doing that, what ends up happening is leaders coach their directs, who coach their directs, who coach their directs, and whether you have 3,000 people or 30,000 people, as long as the core values and the leadership principles and philosophies are consistent across the organization, the system is just there to keep things, organized, basically.
Wait, one last question.
What were some of the most painful moments running your company before you sold it?
Lots of painful moments. A couple of them would be on the day that we launched. So I said that we started in November of 2009. That was actually the date that we launched. We started the company a few months before that. But the date that we launched was in November of 2009 at this huge trade show, the biggest trade show in the real estate industry, called the National Association of Realtors Conference. And we had just raised the $500,000, and we committed $100,000 of the $500,000 to be at this trade show. We had this massive booth, and all these people that were there to help us, and commercials that we had produced. Like, we went all in, because our strategy was go big or go home. We thought that it would be difficult to convince customers to do business with us if we were not a legitimate company, spending legitimate money at this trade show. Well, the day that trade show started, the National Association of Realtors, which is our biggest trade association in the real estate space, announced an exclusive partnership and investment in our biggest competitor, DocuSign. So that was a discouraging moment, because we were literally just starting the company, and here we are competing against this other company that had raised $50 million or something at that time, and signed an exclusive deal with the largest trade association in the business. So that was a low point. But I would say the lowest point of all was a moment where we completely ran out of money. And I had to sit in front of our staff, which was about twice this size maybe at the time, many of which were my personal friends, because sometimes, back to the hiring question, sometimes your friends are about the only ones that you can convince in the early days to come work with you. So we had a lot of friends and friends of friends who were working for the company, and we ran out of money. And this was after Matt and I had gone like 9 or 10 months without a dollar of salary. And I had to sit in front of the room and lay off half the staff in one day. That was by far the most painful moment that we experienced, and it was also, a great lesson that we learned, which is never run out of money. It hurts.
Well, that's great. Everyone, I want to give a round of applause to Austin Allison.
Great job. That was awesome. Thank you.